The council was ready to lock the doors of St. Bridget's Church for good. I was 64, a widow, and that little church had been the heartbeat of my town for as long as I could remember. If they sold it, the food pantry that fed hungry families every night would disappear, and no one seemed to care. I felt small, tired, and completely out of strength. But the night before the vote, something happened inside those stone walls that I still struggle to put into words. A single flicker of light moved in a way I cannot explain, and in that moment I realized I was not standing there alone. I'll tell you exactly what I saw, and you can decide for yourself. All I know is what came after shook our whole town to its core. But before I begin this unbelievable story, I would be so thankful if you subscribe and write in the comments where you are watching from. It means a lot to me. Now, let me start. My name is Evelyn Carter. I was 64 at the time, retired from nursing, living alone in the same little Pennsylvania town where I was born. My husband had passed away 6 years earlier, and the quiet of the house sometimes pressed in on me like a heavy blanket. St. Bridget's Church had become my second home, not because I was the most faithful woman. If I'm being honest, after my husband's death, my faith had grown thin, more habit than conviction, but because it was where people still came together. The food pantry in the basement fed dozens of families every week. The church hall hosted soup suppers, AA meetings, even little birthday parties for children whose parents couldn't afford to rent a place. It wasn't just a church. It was the heart of our town. That night, I slipped into the back pew the way I always did, unnoticed, content just to be in the room. But then Father O'Connor, his voice trembling a little, announced that the town council had approved the sale of St. Bridget's property to a developer. They wanted to tear down the church and build luxury apartments. It felt like all the air left the room at once. I remember gripping the wood of the pew so hard my knuckles turned white. The pantry, gone. The church I'd been baptized in, gone. Around me, people muttered. Some sighed in resignation. Others just shrugged. "Times are changing," I heard a man say behind me. "You can't fight City Hall." His words stung because part of me believed them. After all, who was I? Just an old woman with fading strength and bills of my own stacked on the kitchen counter. What difference could I make against men in suits with money on their side? I walked home slowly that evening, each step heavier than the last. My mind kept replaying the faces of the children I'd handed bread to at the pantry, the tired mothers who whispered "thank you" with eyes full of quiet shame. Where would they go now? Who would feed them? By the time I reached my kitchen, the sun was setting. I didn't bother turning on the light. I just sat at the old wooden table that still bore scratches from when my kids were young. That's when it happened. Through the cracked glass of my kitchen window, a single shaft of light broke through. It stretched across the room and landed square on the table. At first I thought it was nothing, just the last ray of sunlight slipping in before dusk. But then I saw it clearly. The light formed a perfect cross, not a vague shape, not an angle of coincidence, but a glowing, sharp-edged cross stretching across the wood. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. The room felt suddenly still, almost heavy, as if time itself had paused. My hands trembled as I reached toward it, half expecting it to vanish when I moved, but it didn't. It held steady, burning soft and golden. "Lord," I whispered, my voice shaking, "is this from you?" The cross lingered for what felt like an eternity, but must have been only seconds. Slowly, it faded as the sun slipped lower, leaving me staring at nothing but scratched wood. Yet something inside me had shifted. I remember sitting there long after darkness fell, the question echoing in my chest. Was that just light through a crack in old glass? Or was heaven trying to tell me something? I couldn't answer it then. But looking back now, I know that moment was the beginning, because that cross of light wasn't just an accident of sun and glass. It was a summons. And at the time, I had no idea how much it would demand of me. That night, after the cross of light faded from my table, I couldn't bring myself to sleep. I must have walked circles around my kitchen for an hour, replaying it in my mind. I kept telling myself it was just sunlight through a crack, nothing more. But if it was nothing, why did my hands still tremble? Why did my chest feel like a drum beating from the inside? Sometime after midnight, I opened the drawer where my husband's old Bible had sat untouched since his funeral. The leather was cracked, soft from years of his hands, and I could still see his little notes scribbled in the margins. I pressed the cover to my face, and for the first time in years, I let myself cry. I whispered, "God, if that was you in the kitchen tonight, then I need you to tell me what to do, because I don't have any fight left in me." I let the Bible fall open, not searching, just desperate. My eyes landed on a verse that seemed to leap straight out of the page, Isaiah 58:10-11. "If you pour yourself out for the hungry and satisfy the desire of the afflicted, then shall your light rise in the darkness, and the Lord will guide you continually." I read it again, slowly, word by word. If you pour yourself out for the hungry. I thought of the food pantry, the children with hollow cheeks, the mothers clutching grocery bags with tears in their eyes. The verse hit me like fire. It didn't feel like reading. It felt like being read, as if God Himself was reminding me that feeding the hungry wasn't just charity, it was obedience. I sat there shaking, clutching that Bible like a lifeline. "But why me, Lord?" I whispered. "I'm old. I'm tired. I'm nobody." Still, the words burned. They burned so deeply I couldn't turn the page, couldn't move my eyes, couldn't escape them. When dawn finally broke, I dragged myself to the diner on Main Street, still dazed. I tried to share with a neighbor what had happened. I told him about the cross of light, about the verse, about how I felt God was speaking. He chuckled into his coffee and said, "Evelyn, you're seeing what you want to see. You can't fight City Hall. Let it go." The waitress smirked. Another man muttered, "Sentimental nonsense." I laughed weakly along with them, pretending I wasn't embarrassed, but inside I was bleeding. Their words made me feel foolish, but the fire of Isaiah wouldn't go out. In fact, it only grew hotter. That night, exhaustion finally pulled me into sleep, and then came the dream. I was standing outside St. Bridget's. The doors were chained shut with heavy iron, the kind you'd see on an abandoned factory. Children were pounding on them, their small fists echoing like thunder. "Please, let us in," they cried. Their voices pierced me. I tried to push the doors open, but the chains rattled and held fast. Suddenly, the children's faces blurred into the faces of soldiers, mothers, old men, the hungry, the lost, the broken, all of them crying and me powerless. I woke up gasping, drenched in sweat, tears streaming down my cheeks. For a long moment, I just sat there clutching the sheets, my heart racing. It felt too real to be just a dream. I stumbled into the kitchen, turned on the light, and looked at that same cracked window where the cross had appeared. It was dark now, but I couldn't shake the sense that God was still speaking through it. "Lord," I whispered, voice hoarse, "if you're asking me to fight for this church, I don't know how, but if you're really with me, then show me what to do." I didn't hear an answer that night, just silence, thick and heavy. But something inside me, some stubborn corner of my heart, refused to dismiss what I'd seen and heard. I didn't know it then, but the dream of those locked doors was only the first warning, and the fire of Isaiah 58 was just beginning to pull me into a battle I never thought I'd have the courage to fight. The dream of those chained church doors stayed with me all week. I couldn't shake it, no matter how much I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination. Every time I walked past St. Bridget's, I felt like I could still hear those children pounding, their cries echoing in my chest. By the time the first council meeting came, I was exhausted, but I knew I had to be there. I sat in the hard wooden chair in that cramped chamber, surrounded by men in press suits and a few townsfolk curious enough to attend. My heart pounded so loud I could barely hear the proceedings. Finally, my name was called. I stood, legs trembling, clutching my Bible for dear life. I told them about the pantry. I told them about the children and the families. My voice shook as I spoke of what the church meant to our town, not just as a building, but as a refuge. I begged them to reconsider. When I finished, the chairman looked at me with the kind of smile you give a child who doesn't understand how the world works. "Mrs. Carter," he said, his tone polished, "with all due respect, this is about practicality, not sentimentality." A few people chuckled. My cheeks burned hot. I wanted the floor to open up and swallow me whole. I gathered my things quickly, staring at the ground as I left. Outside, the sky had opened into rain, cold and relentless. By the time I reached home, I was drenched to the skin. I dropped my umbrella on the floor, collapsed beside my bed, and sobbed like I hadn't in years. That's when it happened. For the first time since my husband's funeral, I prayed out loud. Not the kind of neat prayer you say in church, but the raw kind that rips straight from your chest. "Lord, I don't know what to do. I can't do this. I am not strong enough. Please, please help me." At first there was only silence. I pressed my face into my hands, ashamed of my own weakness. But then, and I can hardly describe it, a calm, steady presence seemed to fill the room, and in the middle of that stillness, I heard it. Not with my ears exactly, but in the deepest place of my heart. "Do not be afraid, I am with you." I gasped and sat upright. My first thought was that I'd imagined it, but the peace that washed over me in that moment wasn't imagination. It was real. It was as though someone had wrapped their arms around me, lifting the weight I'd been carrying for years. I clutched my husband's Bible to my chest and wept, but this time the tears felt different. Not only grief, hope too. The next morning, I woke up steadier. My body was still weary, but my spirit was not. I dressed slowly, pulled my hair back, and went to the second council meeting. I was still the same small woman they had dismissed before, but this time, something inside me had shifted. When my turn came, I didn't ramble. I didn't beg. I opened my Bible to Isaiah 58, the verse that had burned itself into me, and I read it aloud. "If you pour yourself out for the hungry and satisfy the desire of the afflicted, then shall your light rise in the darkness, and the Lord will guide you continually." I could feel my voice trembling, but it wasn't fear this time. It was conviction. The room grew quiet. Even the chairman who had smirked at me before stopped tapping his pen and leaned back in his chair. For just a moment, I saw something flicker across his face. Doubt, or maybe recognition that these weren't just my words. When I finished, the silence hung heavy. No applause, no shouts of agreement, but no laughter either. I gathered my Bible and walked out, not triumphant, but unbroken. For the first time, I felt I wasn't standing there alone. That night, I sat in my kitchen, staring again at the cracked window. I whispered, "Was that really you, Lord? Did you really speak to me?" The room was quiet, but the peace inside me answered for itself. I didn't have proof. I didn't have victory. But I had something I hadn't felt in years. The courage to keep going. Looking back now, I know that was the night the battle changed. Not on paper, not in the council's vote, but in me. Because once you hear that voice, once you feel that presence, you can't go back to silence. And little did I know, the next sign waiting for me would be even stranger. It wouldn't come in my kitchen or in a Bible verse. It would come on the courthouse steps through a stranger I would never forget. The following week was one of the hardest of my life. I had spoken my heart before the council. I had prayed until my knees ached, and still the reality loomed. They intended to sell St. Bridget's. The notices were already being printed, and the developers' representatives were shaking hands with council members like the deal was done. I told myself I wouldn't cry anymore, but I did. Quiet tears over dishes, hot tears into my pillow, even sharp, angry tears when I saw the men in suits walking into City Hall as if they owned the place. I felt small, foolish, and utterly defeated, and yet there was that voice. "Do not be afraid, I am with you." It lingered in the back of my mind, steady as a heartbeat. I held on to it the way a drowning person clutches driftwood. The day of the council's final hearing arrived. I wore my best blue dress, the one I used to wear to my husband's office parties years ago. My hands shook as I buttoned it. I wasn't dressing for victory, only for dignity. I wanted them to see that faith could stand tall even when ignored. I remember the weather clearly. The sky was overcast, heavy, like it was waiting to break open. I walked up the courthouse steps, my Bible pressed to my chest. My legs felt like lead. I whispered, "Lord, give me strength just to walk through those doors." And then it happened. At the top of the steps stood a man. I had never seen him before, yet he looked at me as if he'd been waiting. He wasn't dressed like the officials inside. No polished suit, no tie, just simple clothes. His eyes met mine, calm but piercing, and for a moment I forgot to breathe. He stepped closer, his voice low, almost gentle. "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied." I froze. Those words, straight from the Beatitudes in Matthew, words I hadn't thought of in years, words that landed like fire in my chest. My first instinct was to answer, but my throat was too tight. I finally managed, Why are you telling me this?" The man simply smiled. "Because you needed to hear it." He gave a small nod, almost like a blessing, then walked down the steps and melted into the crowd. I turned, craning my neck, but within seconds, he was gone. I stood there shaking, gripping the railing for balance. My mind raced. Who was he? A stranger? An angel? Or, and I hesitate to even say this aloud, was it him? The thought both terrified and comforted me. When I walked into the council chamber that day, I wasn't the same woman who had left it a week before. I wasn't fearless, no. My hands still trembled as I held my Bible. But I was steady. Steady in a way I hadn't been in years. I didn't give a speech that time. I didn't plead or argue. I simply stood when my name was called and repeated the words the stranger had spoken. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. The room fell into silence. No one laughed. No one rolled their eyes. For the first time, I think they saw me not as a sentimental old woman, but as someone standing on ground they couldn't shake. Afterward, people asked me why I said those words. Some thought it was odd, even foolish. I didn't explain. How could I? How do you explain a stranger who appears from nowhere, speaks scripture into your very heart, and disappears before you can even ask his name? That night, lying in bed, I replayed the moment again and again. His face, his voice, the way he looked at me as though he knew everything about me and wasn't afraid of it. I whispered into the darkness, "Lord, was that you?" No answer came, at least not in words, but a warmth filled my chest, the same warmth I'd felt when that quiet voice told me not to be afraid. Looking back now, I believe that was the moment I stopped fighting alone. Something, or someone, was fighting with me. And though I didn't know it then, the battle was about to reach its breaking point, in a storm that would test every ounce of faith I had left. The days after that council hearing felt like walking on the edge of a knife. The officials hadn't backed down, not yet, but something in their eyes had changed. They didn't smirk as easily. They didn't wave me off like a bothersome gnat. It was as if my words, or maybe the words of that mysterious stranger, had lodged themselves in their minds and unsettled them. Still, the sale was on the agenda. The vote was coming. And unless a miracle happened, St. Brigid's was doomed. I tried to keep busy, but my spirit was restless. I cleaned cupboards that didn't need cleaning, wrote letters that went unanswered, and walked the aisles of the church as if memorizing every crack in the stone. More than once I caught myself laying my hand on the pantry door, whispering a prayer for the children who came through it each week. The night before the final vote, I barely slept. I kept hearing the voice, "Do not be afraid. I am with you." I kept seeing the stranger's calm eyes on the courthouse steps, but I also kept remembering the chains in my dream, the children crying, the locked doors. Fear and hope wrestled inside me until dawn. That morning, I walked to St. Brigid's earlier than usual. The church was nearly empty. Just a few candles burning near the altar, their flames flickering against the gray stone walls. I lit one more, whispering, "Lord, I don't know what else to do. If this is the last time I stand here, let me be faithful." And then it happened. As the candle's flame grew stronger, it cast a shadow across the wall. At first it looked like nothing, just light dancing. But slowly the shape sharpened. My breath caught. It was a woman's silhouette, veiled, gentle, her arms open as if inviting me closer. The Virgin Mary. I fell to my knees, the tears coming hot and fast. "Mother," I whispered, "help me. I can't do this alone." The warmth that filled me in that moment was unlike anything I've ever known. It wasn't just comfort. It was courage, as if she was telling me, "Stand, keep going. You are not abandoned." That night, the storm came. I was sitting at my kitchen table when the first crack of thunder shook the house. Rain hammered the roof, the wind howled like a wild thing, and lightning lit up the sky so bright it seemed the world was splitting open. I prayed aloud, clutching my husband's Bible and the small wooden cross the stranger had left in my pocket. By morning, the storm had passed, but word spread quickly. The developer's new office had been struck by lightning. Roof collapsed, records ruined, the sale had to be delayed. People whispered about God's hand in the storm. Some called it coincidence, but many remembered my trembling voice at the hearings, the verses I had read, the fire in my eyes that wasn't really mine. For the first time, I wasn't standing alone. Neighbors who had mocked me weeks earlier came to my door asking, "What can we do?" Candles began appearing on the church steps. Prayers rose again in St. Bridget's walls. It wasn't victory, not yet, but it was hope. Real, breathing hope. And in my heart I knew the Virgin's gaze in the candlelight, the storm that swept through at the perfect moment. None of it was random. The tide was turning. The final battle for St. Bridget's was at hand. The morning of the council's final vote, I woke before the sun. I don't remember sleeping much at all. My mind had been turning all night, wandering back to the flame that had shaped itself into the Virgin's outline, to the storm that had shattered the developer's shiny new office, to the stranger on the courthouse steps who spoke the Beatitudes straight into my soul. I got dressed slowly, buttoning my coat with hands that trembled more from anticipation than fear. For the first time in months, I felt something deep in my bones, a quiet certainty that I wasn't walking into that chamber alone. The council hall was packed. People who had ignored the earlier meetings now crowded the back rows. My neighbors, old parishioners, even a few who hadn't set foot in a church in years, all standing shoulder to shoulder. I caught sight of children from the pantry peeking shyly from behind their mothers' skirts. Their presence alone gave me more strength than I can explain. When my name was called, I didn't bring notes. I didn't clutch papers or statistics. I carried only my Bible. I walked to the podium, every eye fixed on me, and for the first time I didn't feel small. I felt carried. I opened to Isaiah 58 again, my voice steady now. If you pour yourself out for the hungry and satisfy the desire of the afflicted, then shall your light rise in the darkness, and the Lord will guide you continually. I closed the Bible and looked each council member in the eye. You can sell this building if you must. You can take away its stones and its roof, but you cannot take away what God has planted here. This church feeds His children, shelters His people, and gives hope to the weary. That is not sentimentality. That is life. The room was silent. Then, a murmur, a ripple through the crowd. People nodded. Some even wept quietly. I stepped back, my part finished. My knees felt weak, but my heart was at peace. The vote began. One by one, the council members spoke. The first, a firm aye to sell. The second, the same. My stomach twisted, but I kept praying under my breath. The third paused longer than expected. He cleared his throat, looked at me, then said, "Nay." The fourth followed suit. By the fifth and final member, the room was tense enough to snap. He sat with his hands folded, glancing between the crowd and the papers before him. Finally, he sighed and said, "Nay." Gasps broke out, then cheers, then applause that shook the very walls. The motion to sell had failed. By a single vote, St. Bridget's was saved. I sank into my chair, tears streaming down my cheeks, unable to move. Neighbors surrounded me, hugging, crying, thanking God out loud. Some people fell to their knees right there in the council hall. And for one radiant moment, I felt the Virgin's gaze again, warm and steady, as though she was whispering, "You are not alone. You never were." That Sunday, St. Bridget's was fuller than I had seen it in years. Candles glowed in every corner. The pantry doors swung wide. Families came not just for food, but to give thanks. People who had mocked faith found themselves singing hymns with cracked voices, their hands lifted in gratitude. I sat in my usual pew, clutching my husband's old Bible, and whispered, "Thank you, Lord. Thank you for not leaving me." Even now, months later, I can still feel the echo of it all. The stranger's voice, the storm's roar, the Virgin's shadow in the flame. I don't pretend to understand it fully. Maybe I never will. But I know this. God heard the cry of His children. He answered not with thunder or spectacle, but with mercy. And for me, that mercy has changed everything. I no longer live as a woman defeated, but as one who has seen with her own eyes that heaven still leans close, that miracles still happen, and that even the smallest voice, when carried by God, can move mountains. So when people ask me what happened to St. Bridget's, I smile through my tears and tell them the truth. It wasn't saved by me. It was saved by grace. When I look back now, I see more than just a battle for an old church. I see how God can use even the smallest of us, at the weakest point of our lives, to do something we never thought possible. And I hope my story reminds you that you are never really standing alone, no matter how dark the night feels. If this touched you, please give it a like so more people can hear it. I would love to read your thoughts in the comments. Tell me how God has carried you through in your own life. And if you know someone who needs encouragement today, share this video with them. Finally, don't forget to subscribe so you can walk with me through more stories of faith and hope. Thank you so much for watching, and God bless you.